The reason why I am on TV more than anybody else who worked for Chuck Schumer is because I'm the best actor who ever worked for Chuck Schumer, right? I'm a improv comic. I'm a guy who's been, before I did TV on Fox News, I had done 10 years of TV on local TV, doing a show called Youth in Politics in my 20s.
And people don't know your improv background.
It's the best thing for it. I'd go into a green room and I'd see a very smart person on the other side of the table with me, but I'd see that guy looking at notes. I knew I had him.
Hello and welcome to Along the Way Life's Journey. I'm your host, Carl Buccellato. I've told you many times I've traveled millions of miles around the world and met some of the most interesting people you can ever imagine. People who inspire and motivate other people to be more than who they can be on their own. It happened in my life, made me a better person for it, and I'm sure you can benefit and gain from just such experiences. I have just such a man on today, a man that you will, I know, recognize from TV. His name is Chris Hahn. Chris is an attorney. He's a Democratic Party activist. He is an individual who hosts his own pod show. It's called The Aggressive Progressive, and he does get aggressive sometimes. And he also has he's a host of a syndicated radio program. But Chris is also a husband, a father, a son, and an active participant in his community. So welcome to the show, Chris. Thanks for being here with us.
Am I allowed to call you Uncle Carl on this show?
Yes, I was going to do that later in the show, but I'm going to do it now. For a purpose of transparency, those of you who don't know already, I know this man since he was a baby and I changed his diaper. This is my nephew, Christopher, who I love dearly. And he is my sister Joan's son, and I'm his godfather. So along the way, we have been very close in a number of different things. Many of you don't know, but when I was a young man, I was an active Democrat myself. Now I'm a conservative Christian. None of that matters. What matters is who we want this country, who we are willing to support and to help this country to be better, how we help it to be better, who we are as individuals. So, Chris, thank you for coming to the show. And you can call me Uncle Carl. You can call me Joe. You can call me Rojo. Whatever you want to do.
Great. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit something about your background so people will catch up to where I am and know more about you as the person rather than just the commentator.
So I grew up on Long Island in a very blue-collar community called Center Reach. I also grew up in Ronkonkoma, which is also a blue-collar community, but I tend to identify more with where I went to high school, which was Center Reach High School. I spent my 4 years of high school there. Very meager, family. My parents, as you know, were very young when I was born. My mother was barely 17 when I was born, as was my father. They divorced before I was 5. So we had a very humble lifestyle. We lived in a very blue-collar community, and we were kind of on the lower end of the income scale for that community, I would say. I worked hard in school. I was one of the youngest kids in my class because my mother was 16, 17 when I was born. And by the time I was 4, she's like, let's get this kid to school. So my 20-year-old mother put me on the bus when I was 4 years old. And I was always the youngest kid in my class, which became a bit of a struggle early on for me academically. But I think I caught up by the time I was in high school. And then when I hit college and law school, I surpassed my expectations. I think actually being young and having to scrape and scrap actually helped me out in that regard. But also being of modest means made me want to work hard really early. I got my first paper route when I was 11 years old. And I grew that route from 25 papers to 100 papers and was, making enough money by the time I was 12 that my parents didn't need to buy me clothes anymore. I was doing my own, clothes shopping. And then I, was able to do a lot of that stuff. I bought a car when I was 16. You helped me with tires. I called you.
Let me stop you there a moment. Folks, I just want you to know, this is my nephew, and he is the only one in my family or friends that I ever loaned money to that paid it all back.
Well, I knew I'd be able to pay him back.
And he did it.
You know what it was? It was a big nut at the time. It was like, I was making about $75 a week and I needed like $500.
Right.
And I said, just give me like, 3 or 4 months, I'll pay you back. And I did. And, but that was my first car. My Chevy Nova, which I needed to start with a screwdriver and borrow money to fix the tires. But by the time I was like almost 17, I was doing pretty well. I was, selling suits and I was
And in the
making,
trunk, I remember.
yeah, I was making like grown man salary at the time. I was making like at the time in 1988, like $400, $500 a week. I bought a Camaro off of Aunt Maria's then husband, Uncle Steve. I bought his Camaro, and it was a beautiful car. It was, it was a 1985 Z28 with T-tops and all the bells and whistles, and it was great. It was king of the world. And I, had a great time in high school. Played football, I did theater, I fenced. I was a nationally ranked fencer. I ran track, but I wasn't a stellar track athlete. I actually ran track to stay in shape for the other sports. And I played baseball. I played hockey. I just was a constant on the go. And then I was working 2 or 3 jobs usually. On top of that,
You're an entrepreneur.
I squeaked into college. I fortunately could kick a field goal, honestly, because my grades were average at best, middling when I was in high school. I knew I wanted to go to college. My senior year of high school, I decided I didn't want to go to college to be an actor. I felt I had all that skill I needed. I needed to learn anymore in that effort. I'd won some awards. I was very like, you know what? I already know how to do this. I was in this, I spent half a day at a performing arts high school. And my junior year going into my senior year, they wanted to cancel that program. So I organized the students to go down to the school board to speak on behalf of that program. And I actually went right from a baseball game. I was in my baseball uniform, standing before the school board. And I gave this impassioned speech about how this program is great for the district. It's unique and we got to keep it. And I got a big round of applause from everybody. And we wound up winning. We wound up keeping the school board. I was like, that's a thrill. I really liked getting that done. And I said, forget it. I'm not going to be an actor. I'm going to go into politics. I'm going to be a lawyer. And my guidance counselor at the time told me that, well, you spent, 2 years at this performing arts school. If you're not going to go to school to be an actor, you should probably learn a trade and join a union or something. You're not going to get anywhere in college. That's what he said. I cursed him out. I got brought into the principal's office. The principal knew me very well. He said, what did he say to you? He said, just stay here. You're not in trouble. So it was good. I wound up started off at Buffalo State College. I was redshirted from the football team that year. And I got very annoyed because he told me I'd start my freshman year. And he told me my freshman year is next year. So I transferred to Albany, where they were honest with me. He told me I wouldn't start till my junior year. The kicker who was in front of me was a great athlete. He was a much better athlete than me. He broke all the records at school. He was also like the strongest kid on the team. He could out squat and out bench every other player on the team. He was a kicker. And he was a great guy, a good friend of mine. But I was his backup. I played a few games until my junior year, and then I played my junior and senior year at Albany. I also became the student body president at the University of Albany. And I worked in the state legislature, and I was the student. I was the legislative coordinator for the New York State Student Assembly, which was basically lobbying the legislature on issues important to SUNY. And I graduated. I didn't go straight to law school. I got a job in advertising, and I ran for public office. I managed the state Senate campaign that failed miserably. I worked a little bit on Mario Cuomo's failed 1994 reelection campaign where he lost to George Pataki.
Yeah.
And I ran my own failed campaign, but I barely failed in a district that Democrats never even ran candidates in. They were like, oh, you want to run for the seat? Sure, go ahead, run for the seat. And I lost by a very small margin. The kind of margin that makes you think, what could I have done different? But the kind of margin that other people in politics say, wow, what did you do right? You shouldn't have been that close, right?
Sure.
But as a kid, who, thought he was called by God to be in politics at the time, that was a tough loss. I remember getting a card from you with a bunch of sayings of people who had tried and failed. And I still have that somewhere. Particularly Sir Edmund Hillary, when he failed the first attempt to climb Mount Everest, said, I'm gonna get there because I'm getting, I keep growing and that mountain staying the same size. It's a quote that sticks with me. But I wound up going to law school. I spent, 3 years in law school. I worked in the district attorney's office in both Suffolk and Queens County here in New York. I clerked for a federal district court judge, Judge Platt, who was incidentally a very conservative judge who was appointed by Nixon and had been on the bench for, at that time, almost 25, 30 years. And I interviewed for him. And on my resume, I had worked at the 1992 Democratic National Convention that nominated Bill Clinton to be president of the United States. You saw that on my resume. So we spent, I had an hour and a half interview with him. I'd say an hour of it was talking about our football careers. He played football at Yale, and I played at Albany. And 15 minutes of it was talking about the law. And then 15 minutes of him admonishing me about my liberal leanings. And he said, I'm going to hire you. I like you, but you better not bring any liberal crap into my court. Which, by the way, I did. Look, I consider my liberalism comes out of my Christian upbringing. Matthew 25 is really what drives me, right? That which you do unto the least of them, you do unto Christ. And as a, intern in the court, you don't get to write too many opinions, but you do get to write some. And particularly in federal district court, Social Security and veteran benefits appeals, the district court level is the court of last resort. It's like the Supreme Court on these things. They get to decide if these people are going to get their benefits after the administrative levels of the courts don't let it. And there was one case I remember distinctly. It was a veteran who came home from Vietnam, who had been living on the streets, who, suffered great mental harm from the war. It was post-traumatic stress disorder at the time. I don't even think they were calling it that. I think they were still calling it shell shock at the time. And he had failed at every level of the court, and he had really bad lawyers. And I said, I'm finding a way to give this guy his benefits. I'm going to find a way to give this guy the benefits. And I went into the law because his lawyer didn't brief it right. I went into the law and I found a way to give the guy the benefits. So I write the opinion. I leave it for the judge to sign. I come in the next day, and the judge comes to my cubicle, a little cubicle. I was just an intern law clerk, and he throws the opinion at me. He goes, "You expect me to sign this? This wasn't in any of the papers. You made up the law, blah, 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 blah." And I go, "The law is sound. If you don't like it, you could write it." And he signed it, and he gave the guy his benefits. And I was very, very happy. He yelled at me, but he was a stodgy old guy, very conservative, but he had a great heart. And, and that was that. So I left law school, and I was working at a firm, and I was miserable. And I saw that Chuck Schumer was opening an office on Long Island. And I said, I want that job. I called the one guy I knew in Washington, a guy named Tony Bullock, who was then chief of staff to Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was the great senator from the state of New York for many years. And he had run for county executive the same year I ran for county legislature. And I stayed in touch with him. And he said, that's a perfect job for you. Let me put you in touch with Polly Trottenberg. Polly Trottenberg, who's now the deputy secretary of transportation for Joe Biden, had been commissioner of transportation in New York City, but was Chuck's legislative director, had been in LA for Moynihan. He gave my resume to her, told me to call her and send her a resume. So I started sending her resumes and calling her and leaving messages. I wasn't getting any response. I did this for about 3 months. I changed the font of my resume. I'd send her the resume. 3 months go by, nothing's happening. I don't hear anything. I'm getting frustrated. I call Tony Bullock, and he goes, "It's funny, Chris. Polly just called me an hour ago looking for your resume." I go, "What are you talking about?" I faxed her, a copy of my resume every week for the last 3 months. He's like, "Yeah, nobody uses faxes anymore. You have to email it." And he gave me a different number, Mike Lynch, who is still Chuck's chief of staff. And I emailed Mike Lynch. He got back to me immediately. I interviewed with him the day I got admitted to the bar. I went to Brooklyn to the courthouse to get admitted to the bar. And then I took the train into Manhattan to Senator Schumer's office. I interviewed with Lynch. He liked me. He said, "You'll be hearing from us." I went back to my firm, which was in Great Neck. They gave me a bonus for getting admitted to the bar. I took the bonus and decided to go skiing that weekend. And while I was away skiing, I get the call, "Chuck wants to see you on Sunday." So I came home early from the ski trip and met with Chuck Schumer, and he hired me shortly thereafter. I had he asked me to do a memo of how we would win Long Island, and I wrote up this great memo of, local issues and understanding the different regions of the island and how it's not homogenous. And I got into a brawl on a conference call. I didn't think I was going to get it. I'm like, why am I different than everybody else who works from Chuck Schumer? I'm not an Ivy League educated or close to Ivy League educated guy. I went to SUNY Albany and St. John's School of Law. And, I'm interviewing with guys who went to, Harvard and Yale and George Mason and other, great schools who have been in politics. And here I am, I'm applying for this position, which was not a low level position. And, but they didn't really have the knowledge of Long Island. And I get into this call, and Chuck's political consultant, a guy named Hank Morris, who's like a legend in New York politics, is on the call. And I had actually known him when I was really young. He had managed the campaign for Pat Halpin, and he did a horrible reelection job for Pat Halpin's county executive race in Suffolk County. And he starts lecturing me on things on Long Island. And I just stopped him. And I said, "Let me explain something to you. Most of us on Long Island live west of the canal," referring to the Shinnecock Canal, which is the beginning of the Hamptons, right? Yeah. "And what you're saying may fly east of the canal, but let me tell you how we see it west of the canal." And I just laid into him for like 5 minutes, and everybody was silent while I was doing it. It was a conference call, not a Zoom. I got to work on all sorts of issues important to Long Island and the nation. I was there during 9/11, which was, a traumatic time, being a New Yorker. It was, I would say it was the best of times and it was the worst of times, right? Because
did you steal that from somewhere? The best of time, the worst of time?
Yeah, it's a little book I read once upon a time. It was a time where it was really bad because so many of our friends and neighbors lost people. Yeah. And our city was, in ruins, and part of it anyway. Yeah. And we were working around the clock. 9/11, I left my office on 9/11, because they evacuated us because they weren't sure what was happening. I went home, actually went out to my mother's house. And the next day I went back, and I did not take a break till Thanksgiving. And even that was just a 1-day break. Yeah. And then we kept going really straight through. It was like 6 or 7 months of around the clock, 7-day a week in a foxhole. But the beautiful thing about it was all the partisan crap was not there. Right. Everybody was working together. We all had a goal. The goal was rebuilding New York, figuring out who did this to us and getting them back. And it was, politically speaking, it was a wonderful time to be in politics because we were actually getting things done and helping people with real immediate problems and seeing the results, and then helping rebuild our city, right? So it was and everybody was on board with it, right? Like, President Bush, Mayor Giuliani, Chuck Schumer, Hillary Clinton, George Pataki, we were all working together.
It was for a bigger vision. It was for a bigger purpose. Yes.
Yeah, it was for a bigger purpose. It's what government's supposed to be in a crisis, right? What you expect.
But why do we have to have a crisis for that to happen? You may not remember, but when I was a younger man, for a number of years, I was involved with a group called the Council of 100, which I was part of the NAIB, the National Association of Independent Business. And 100 of us were selected to represent small business to the White House. And I was privileged to serve in that position under Reagan, Papa Bush, and Clinton. Okay, Reagan's last term, Clinton's first term. So I was there through a lot of that stuff, not 9/11, of course. And I could tell you that with Reagan and Tip O'Neill, they were, of course, different politically, but they acted in a fashion more like statesmen than politicians. They
Well,
knew
yeah.
that it was a greater good to be served, and they figured out how to make it happen. We don't
Well,
see
I think that I think the reward system is all messed up now in politics, right? It used to be you campaign in poetry, you govern in prose, the old saying, you go out there, you campaign, and then when you govern, it's a whole different thing, right?
Yeah.
Now, more people want to have my career than their career in Congress, right? I am a pundit.
Right.
I'm not paid to go on TV to, make a better case for, democracy.
Humanity,
Or
right?
I'm not there to, I'm on television. The reason why I am on TV more than anybody else who worked for Chuck Schumer is because I'm the best actor who ever worked for Chuck Schumer, right?
Yeah.
I'm a improv comic. I'm a guy who's been, before I did TV on Fox News, I had done 10 years of TV on local TV.
Yeah.
Doing a show called Youth in Politics in my 20s.
And people don't know your improv background.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
improv
very
comedy is the best.
beneficial to you.
It's the best thing for it.
Yeah.
I'd go into a green room and I'd see a very smart person on the other side of the table with me, but I'd see that guy looking at notes.
Yeah.
I knew I had him, because how are they going to have notes for what like Sean Hannity's going to ask them? Sean Hannity, is also an improv comic,
Yeah.
right? He's a guy
Yeah.
like Sean Hannity's people would call you up and say, okay, here are the 10 topics Sean might want you to talk about. And then the guest beforehand will be talking about a different topic and it'll pique his interest and he'll just want to keep talking about that.
Yeah.
So I always felt you got to be ready to talk about anything and anything going on politically. And you got to just react at the top of your intelligence. You can't plan what you're going to have to say, which is the improv rule. React
Right.
at the top of your intelligence.
Right.
And so, I get these gigs. I mean, and there are a lot of people who come out of Schumer's office who have bigger titles than me and bigger portfolios than me. And they do 1 or 2 appearances on TV and then you never hear from them again. And the reason why I keep going, and I'm no longer at Fox. I'm working for News Nation now, which is the startup that Chris Cuomo's at and Dan Abrams. It's kind of trying to be down the middle. It's because of that. But the reward system in politics, back to why things are different now, is people want this job. They want to be pundits. They want to get clicks. They want to get likes. And if I do a post about how cute my dog is, it'll get 50 likes. If I do a post and say somebody's committed treason, I'm going to get 1 million likes. Yeah. And so the reward system is what's driving it. And the founders of our country did not want our elected officials to be that in tune with that reward system. They wanted them to be elected and then use their best judgment to make laws in the better interest of the entire nation.
Right.
And right now, what you got is everybody looking at their Twitter feed or looking at their Facebook feed or looking at their whatever.
They're also professional politicians that take a job, they're elected into a job, and then they have 30, 40 years. The original founders were farmers. They'd go and they'd work, and then they'd go home again.
Well, what's worse is for a lot of them, particularly in the House of Representatives, it's the best job they'll ever have. Yeah. Right? I mean, senators, Chuck Schumer went to Harvard Law School and Harvard undergraduate. He probably could have done anything he wanted, which is why, he was up or out twice in his career, right? He was an assemblyman who ran for Congress. If he would have lost that race, he would have went and practiced law and been a millionaire like his brother. His brother's a doctor and very successful. Instead, he wanted public service. He made it to the House. 15 years later, Senate seat was opening up. It wasn't open up. He was going to challenge Al D'Amato, an incumbent. right? So he's like, I'm up or out. I'm going to go for it. If I lose, I'll go make some money and I'll be happy, whatever. But I think a lot of people in the House, some in the Senate, but not as many, it's the best job they'll ever have. Like, they are never going to get a job that pays as much, gives them as much respect, and gives them as much freedom. So they're going to hold on to that job and use the reward system the best they can. And the House is becoming almost untenable in a lot of ways. And the leadership is really not able to really do what they used to do. When I was there, look, when I worked in the Senate, it was, I started 23 years ago now, right? It was a different world. I mean, were there partisan fights? Yeah. Not every day.
But not like this.
Most of the time, it was just like, okay, what are we going to trade? And by the way, I blame some of that on John McCain, who I love, one of my favorite of all time. Yeah. John McCain was very much against a thing called earmarks.
Yeah.
Right. What earmarks are is,
I know what they are.
They have a project. Well, maybe some of your audience doesn't know. They have a project they want to get put in the bill, and they in a budget, and they get it put in. Yeah. John McCain hated that. He thought it should all come from the agencies, and they should decide what projects get funded, and they should put it in a budget. He hated earmarks, but earmarks was the grease that kept the machine moving. Yeah. And with that, and it's starting to. They're bringing earmarks back now because they're realizing that they can't pass a budget, they can't pass debt ceilings, they can't things that would just be routine 30 years ago are now big partisan fights that we're going down to deadlines, and Fitch is going to downgrade our credit rating over, and if we would have gave a guy, $1 million to, resod a baseball field, we
got through.
We'll get the thing through.
It's a step away from pork barrel. I understand what it does.
I don't believe it's pork barrel. I think the member knows better, frankly, than the agency. That's what the member's there for.
Well, they should know better because they represent their local community. They should know what the local community needs. Unfortunately, when you look at some of the history of some of these people, they get into communities that were indigent, poverty level, and they're there for 30 years, and it's worse now than it was in the beginning. So
nobody knows who the regional director of the Department of Interior is for their region, but they know who their congressman is. Right. So they're going to go talk to their member, and the member is going to advocate for them. That's the job. That's their job, in my opinion. So
you're an attorney. You've been around politics on the inside for 23 years now. Would you ever have imagined that the United States would be in a position as it is today with two candidates with legal issues the way they are, imposing upon both of them, that the American people are going to have to settle for something or speak up loud enough to get new candidates?
Well, I disagree with your premise that they both have legal issues. One of them has legal issues.
Come on, they both do.
One of them's kid has legal issues. They appointed a special counsel today, but it was the same guy who's been investigating, who was a Trump appointee. And I think it's, unfortunately in politics in this country, we don't have kings and queens and dukes and lords, but everybody trades on their parents' names. So I don't like it, and I don't think what he did was, I don't think what Hunter Biden did was good. But whether or not it's illegal or whether or not it's Joe Biden's fault, that's for the voters to decide. I don't know that he has legal issues. Trump has legal issues. Trump, in my opinion, tried to overturn the results of an election illegally. He had every right to go to court. He did. He went to court 62 times. He won once, and it was a ministerial thing that he won on about how close somebody could stand while watching the count. It's fine. You're allowed to do that. I'm a lawyer. I would never begrudge somebody from going to court to try to enforce their rights. But after the courts have spoken, including the Supreme Court, which had 3 appointees he picked who all voted against him every time to do what we've done in this country for 240 years, tip your cap, say I lost, I'll see you in 4 years, if you want to do that. And that was his right. He didn't do that. And I think some of the things that were said, and the more I read these indictments, the more troublesome they appear to me. The more, and by the way, that's not to say that the Republicans can't nominate somebody who's not Trump, who's a good conservative, who has, good conservative morals and issues, and runs a campaign based on what a conservative is. But this guy, I don't understand.
I don't think he'll be the candidate. I frankly don't think so. He has the the popularity of people who think he's getting a raw deal, whether he is or he isn't, doesn't matter. But I don't think he'll be the candidate, nor do I think he should be the candidate. I think there should be someone else. But I do disagree with you with this. You know, if you smell smoke, there's fire in there somewhere. And I was
If every
I was
politician
in Washington not as much as
if every
deeply as you,
politician
but
was prosecuted
Joe had
because
that
they're
reputation 30 years ago. You know, he was.
I've known Joe
People
Biden.
don't amass the kind of money you're talking about.
Yeah, but if every politician was prosecuted because their kid used their name to get ahead,
It's more than use their
there'd be
name.
no politicians left. They'd all be in
It's
jail.
more than use their name. I mean, I don't want to get into the details, but when you look at this Burisma stuff and how he had a guy fired and controlled the
Yeah,
bid,
that was
there are boundaries that shouldn't be there.
the facts of that Burisma and the prosecutor in Ukraine, that was not just the policy of the United States of America. It was a policy of the European Union. It was the policy of NATO, that this man was a corrupt prosecutor, and that was what he was delivering.
But
Whether
it
or
just
not
so
that had
happens
anything
he
to do
was
with his son or not.
investigating. It just so happens he was investigating Burisma that was paying his son. He should have excluded himself from that and had someone else do it. You know, there are things that you do at times that shouldn't be done. They go beyond the boundaries. And
Well, I think that was
anyway,
prosecuted.
I think that what I'm asking you is there a hope for this nation of getting back to civility between the parties?
Yes. First of all, I mean, this is not the first time this has happened in this country.
Oh, no.
Right?
No.
I mean, Thomas Jefferson called John Adams a hermaphrodite during the election of 1800. Right. So this kind of nasty stuff is not new to us. I mean, it might seem worse now.
Yeah. Well, we haven't gone about to kill each other yet, but
Right. I mean, it might seem worse now. And it might seem like it'll never end either. I mean, I think when you're going through stuff, it seems like it'll never end.
Yeah.
But I always believe that this too shall pass, right? Like we'll get to a point where, you know, truth will prevail. You know, the problem we have, there's twofold, right? People get their news from one place and the place that agrees with them the most.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
And unfortunately, what is truth is getting lost in that. And people want to have their opinion, confirmed. They want to have it supported.
You want to be right.
Right. And the other point I always make is people now are all on social media and they'll make a statement to their 100 followers on social media that this is what I believe. And now they don't want to ever say they were wrong. And I always say, you know, I have like hundreds of thousands of followers. I have, people who listen to me on the radio and TV, and I make mistakes all the time. I have failed more than I have succeeded in life. I mean, that's why I go back to that note you sent me after I lost my election. You know, I live by that. I have a poster of Lincoln's failures on my wall. Yeah. I have been wrong, and I admit when I'm wrong. And I am more famous than most people. I mean, I don't think I'm famous by any stretch of imagination, but I'm more than most. And my statements have been thrown back at my face, sometimes on national television by big names. And I'm like, yeah, I was wrong when I said that. But then people will put a post up on Facebook to 150 of their friends and family, and they will never go back from that. Yeah. And that, I hate Democrats. They're the devil. And now they realize, oh my God, our guy might be doing something wrong too. I got to be on my team. And I always tell this to young people when they're in getting jobs in government. Either side of the aisle. I mentor a lot of people. And I always tell them, just remember this. You are there for them, the politician. They are not there for you. When this is no longer beneficial to you and your career, it's time to move on. Right?
Absolutely.
And understand that. And I feel it's the same way for the public. The politicians are supposed to be their servants. We are not the servants of the politician. I'm not Joe Biden's servant. When Joe Biden is wrong about something, I say it on TV. Did it about Barack Obama on, when I was on Fox News back when he was president, and he did something. I did not like the drone strikes that Obama did. I said it all the time on television. I get calls from my friends from Schumerland who were working in the Obama administration say, why are you bashing our guy on Fox? You're the only guy there that ever says anything nice about him. Now, you're not saying something nice. I didn't care if he was wrong. I said it, right? We have to get to a point in this country where people have humility and they can say, yeah, I posted that. And maybe at the time I was right, but I'm not. It's not right anymore.
Absolutely. But humility is a human trait. So many of these people purport themselves to be above human traits.
Yeah.
To recognize those are exactly the people we don't need. You wouldn't know this, but there was a guy in our neighborhood when I grew up, when I was a kid in Brooklyn. My father's friend, his name was Joe Dorito. He was a little bitty 5'1" guy. He was a paratrooper, compact paratrooper. And after the war, he had a fear of heights, believe it or not. And I used to go up on the roofs and install TV antennas for him because he was a TV guy. And he always used to say, when people yelled at him, he'd pull up his britches, and he'd say, guys like that, we don't need. And you know what? That's a truism. There are certain people that you come across in life you don't want and you don't need because they're not edifying to you or anyone else. Leave them behind. Like you just said, there's a time to stand and there's a time to walk. You're right.
It was, and what also needs to return is shame in politics.
Yeah.
There's particular things going on in Washington that even like 5 years ago, people would have had shame when it came out and they would have left.
Yeah.
And like this guy here in New York, George Santos. 5 years ago.
How horrible is that?
5 years ago, that guy would have been ran out of either party. There'd be no place in Congress for him.
An absolute fraud.
I mean, Democrats ran this woman out of Congress in 2019. Katie Hahn, I think was her name.
Yeah, because she
and it was because she had a consensual relationship with her campaign manager. Yeah. She was running, and they ran her out. They got rid of her. She left. She resigned in disgrace, shame. Yeah. Right? Al Franken resigned, because somebody didn't like a vaudeville picture he took.
Yeah.
And I don't think he should have resigned, but he did. Yeah. But there's shame there. And yet this guy's still going to Congress, going to vote on the floor on issues that are of vital importance to the nation. I mean, he should be run out of Dodge.
So, Chris, we're running out of time. I don't want to stop you. I can go on talking to you for hours. So I think I'll come to your house in Long Island and you pay you pay for the beer. But
I don't drink, but I always have beer in the house.
I really don't. I'm not a drinker. But I just want to remind you of one thing. And it sounds like bragging. And in a little bit it is. I gave you a gold tip Mont Blanc pen.
I still have it.
You to sign when you went into Congress. That's how much trust and belief I had in you.
It's on my desk. Wait, I have to find it. It's here somewhere. Right. I just cleaned out this.
Point is,
in this room that I'm sitting in right now.
I had confidence in you then. I have confidence in you now. We don't always agree on the same terms, but I love you and I respect your right for your opinions. And I'm going to leave you a few minutes to say anything you want to the folks. And folks, I want to remind you that all of Chris's contact information will be in the show notes. You'll know just how to reach him. They click on, you can go automatically from the show notes to his website or to anything else, and you'll know how to reach him. And I'm sure he'll be open to respond to you with anything you have. The floor is yours for a few minutes.
Yeah. I don't know, Sarah. I love you too. I miss you. It's been too long.
Absolutely.
I am coming down to Florida, I think in October for my sister's 50th birthday. I think I'm going to try. Look, I just hope that I think I'm right that we are going to get past this. I even think the Trump hold is going to break at some point on the right. Because I just felt it's not conservatism. I don't even know what it is. It's a cult of personality. I also believe this, and this is what I've always believed in politics. The candidate needs to make the campaign about the people who he's trying to get to vote for them, not about themselves. Yeah. And forget about Trump's other problems. He's got a million problems. There's a million reasons why I don't like Donald Trump, right? But The biggest problem he has electorally, and I'm speaking as a political consultant, a guy who's been on a million campaigns now, is that he is not speaking to the voters about what he's going to do for them. It is a woe is me, I'm the victim campaign.
Yeah.
And while that might work with a certain segment of the population who just loves him and will do whatever he asks, those, 5% of the voters who are looking to make up their mind don't want to hear about your problems. They want to hear about their problems.
That's right.
And how you're going to fix their problems.
Yeah.
And I think that reckoning is coming, and whether or not it comes for the, before the nomination or after, I find it very hard for him to get elected president again, barring some catastrophe that befalls the nation between him being nominated and the election, because that's always a chance, right?
Yeah.
When you have two parties, one party's in power, something bad could happen that's not even within the control of the party in power, like COVID, frankly. And who gets blamed? The buck stops with the president, as it should.
Yeah.
Barring that kind of catastrophe, I don't know the path for him because of that exact reason. He's too much about him and not enough about us. And and I think we'll get back to a point where we get past that, and we'll have a guy, like a Jimmy Carter type. My cousin Bobby, your grandson, is a great scholar on Jimmy Carter, and Jimmy Carter, for all his faults as president, was the right man for that time. He was like this folksy, good guy who wanted to do the right thing. Circumstances made it hard for him, but we're going to get a guy like that next, I think. And it's going to be one of those guys that's our president. That guy, the guy who we think we should be seeing at the corner bookstore drinking a cup of coffee. And that's what we need, I think. So, and I thought Joe Biden would kind of be that guy, but I think we're too partisan right now, and Trump's still got too much of a hold for him to be above partisanship, because Joe Biden's so old, he's not the future of anything, right? And his kids aren't in politics, so they're not the future of anything. So I want to get to a point where we're past it and we can move on. I think we're going to get there soon.
Let's hope so. God intervenes all the time. Let's hope so.
Yeah.
I do believe that.
Well, as Winston Churchill said, and I went to the Churchill War Rooms when I was in London. You could always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've exhausted all other options.
Yeah, unfortunately,
Right.
Chris, and we try everything else first except going to the right thing first.
Right.
Waste a lot. But Chris, I love having you on the show, and I invite you to come back anytime, and we'll do it again, I'm sure. And we'll talk about October. We'll talk about November. We'll talk about all kinds of other things.
Very good.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for tuning in today. I don't have many hundreds of thousands of followers, but we have a few thousand. And those of us who are here regularly know that I put up a podcast like this every other Wednesday, and I bring forth honest people who speak their mind and speak their story. And here you have a young man who came out of difficult background, and he grew and he persevered, and he became a very solid individual and a very important part of the American scene, because he believes in what he does and he believes in who he is. And I say that to you as well. I know you have your own story. Everybody has their own story. You must tell it. Tell it to your neighbor. Write it down. Tell it to your friends, your neighbors, your family. And write it down, because when it's too late, all that wisdom is gone. It's too late. Make sure you share your story with others. And I ask you again, if you have anyone you'd like to suggest to be on the show, like Chris, if you have a question, if you have an altering point of view, write it in, talk about it. I'll give you a platform. We can talk about it. This is not a one-way street on this show. Never has been, never will be. And I tell you, at the end of this, what I say at the end of every one of my shows, I'm a big blustery guy from Brooklyn, but I know what I'm talking about. Give everybody you know a big hug and tell them you love them, because you may be the only one telling them that today, and they may need it. Tell them you love them. I love you, Chris.
Love you too, Unc.
See you guys. Bye-bye.